Good evening, everybody. I am really happy
Hey,
to have the opportunity for this
you
webinar,
ready?
and I
Hey,
want to thank the scientific staff to support me in this. If someone doesn't know, Scientix is a community that collects and promotes best practices in science, teaching and learning in Europe, and organizing training sections and workshops for STEM teachers. STEM is the acronym for Science, Technology, Engineering, and Mathematics. Science connects STEM to real world. It's coordinated by European SchoolNet. That is a network of 30 European ministries of education based in Brussels, Belgium. Its aim is to bring innovation to schools, teachers, researchers, and companies. The main theme is science, and we are just going to talk about science.
Diciamo ricercatore professore all'università, un'etichetta, ecco la sua è Kim 01, quindi è particolarmente facile da interpretare perché Kim è chimica.
cosa abbiamo fatto? Abbiamo visto il campione, abbiamo guardato fuori, abbiamo consumato nel locale che cosa può essere, il colore marrone, il colore, con quella consistenza, forti del fatto di avere parecchio. Un'altra ditta ha prodotto uno smalto per unghie che bagnando l'unghia dentro la bevanda si colora dopo un po', un colore differente se c'è la presenza di una di queste tre sostanze.
So, science can be taught outside the classrooms. It's amazing. This can be done in the magic places of the city of Urbino, Repubblica Square, courtyard of Raffaello's College, Rinascimento Square, Olbornat's Fortress. They are just some of the amazing locations where, from April to July 2018, every Thursday at 7 p.m., the different science topics are being shared and cultural and social events took place. They are open-ended lessons held by teachers and researchers of Urbino University. High school and university students, citizens and tourists did not miss the opportunity to learn while sipping the UniUrb Spritz. In this way, the University of Urbino could interact more and more closely with the city and the territory. The initiative was promoted by University Carlo Bo in collaboration with the city of Urbino and Urbino Commerce Associations. Through a series of informal meetings, the university formed close connections to people who don't attend university lessons, but who wanted to get an idea of what mathematics is and why it has changed our lives. Even to them, but not only to them, university wants to spread its knowledge. Alessandro Boiolo is Rector Delegate for Scientific Dissemination and Public Engagement and Coordinator of the UniSpritz URB. He received many proposals from the city's bars and cafes and from his colleagues, teachers, and he is going on with this initiative to become a tradition of his city, Urbino, and of the university. Many topics for seminars were announced also through the university's Facebook page, and they allowed to discover, aperitif after aperitif, questions and answers about many science topics. The main goal is not only to make citizens, university students, and tourists close to the scientific subjects, but also to divulgate STEM outside the classroom. Through effective communication, science can be a shared heritage. The UniUrb Spritz distributed visions and passions among the cafe tables in the center of Urbino and suggested scientific topics to teach and learn. Learning, in fact, is a patient pleasure, an emotion that have the perfect sound of a rolling ice in a glass of red-orange bubbles. It's a great pleasure to have as guests the creator and organizer of this initiative of informal scientific and cultural dissemination, Professor Alessandro Boiolo. Thank you. We are glad to have also one of the university professors to propose a very interesting theme for UniSpritz, Giorgio Famiglini. Hi. First of all, thank you to be here and to share this amazing experience with us. Alessandro,
Hello.
for you the first question.
Hello.
How
Hi.
the idea of a scientific break, the Science Spritz, was born?
Well, it was just a matter of trying to find the proper way of bringing all the knowledge and the opportunities of going deeper in understanding the world around us, that is provided by the presence in an ancient city like Urbino of a generalistic university. And we tried to find a way of engaging people outside the universities in discussions that are usually conducted without having direct access to science, at the presence of researchers, professors, scientists who are directly involved in the leading edge of each research topic. So the idea was to exploit the early evening, one of the magic hours in every city and in Urbino in particular, and also a special day, because Thursday for university cities in Italy is a special day in which students who are not resident in the same city are still in the city but ready to leave for the weekend. So this means that it is the last day in which they spend their night out, possibly staying together before going back to their own families. So this is also a very special day in which I would say that the parties that are usually organized by students are quite often a reason for annoying or making some noise who end up annoying citizens. And we decided to use exactly the same day to try to organize something which is informal but institutional, in order to bring to the city not just the noise of the parties, but also some opportunity for understanding something more about the world around us. And this is done by having a drink together with students or citizens in local bars and cafes. And many of the local bars and cafes were pretty and are pretty happy to host us. They are just hosting us in the sense that there is no money involved in this initiative, in the sense that we go there just to speak to people who are at the bar. So we are not bringing our own audience, but rather we hope to meet there someone who take advantage of the presence of a researcher to engage in a conversation about a very specific topic, which is the topic of the day. And Giorgio was one of the speaker or facilitator of researchers involved in one of these UniUrb Spritz. Also, the name is very informal because the UniUrb is the nickname of our university, and Spritz is a drink, as you know. And we combined the two just to make the idea that we are trying to mix elements to make, I would say, sparkling science available to everyone. And I would like also to mention the fact that for universities, dissemination and communication are considered to be a third mission after teaching and research. And in fact, teaching and research are our first missions, but nevertheless, communicating science is very, very important because it's probably the only way, the only instrument that we have in order to try to fight disinformation. And this information is not only fake news. Fake news are the ones which are created as fakes just on purpose. But this information has to be addressed as an issue as well. And this information sometimes is not made on purpose. It's just because the science is not accessible enough. So on our side, we need to do our best in order to make it accessible. And
okay, perfect. Yes. Here we are.
Okay.
Second question is this. How could you involve so many people in your initiative?
Well, it depends on the initiative and on the attractiveness of the speaker, like Giorgio. Well, I think that in general, people appreciate the fact that universities, instead of inviting them to enter university walls and university buildings, try to reach them outside university buildings. And I'm trying to do it in many different ways by making MOOCs, massive open online courses, so online, or online webinars like this one, and you are doing the same, or by bringing my colleagues in local bars and cafes to just speak as if we were there just to have a drink together, and that's the idea. So sometimes this is not a way of having a big audience, but all of these are seeds that we can try to plant in order to make them grow. Because otherwise, if we consider it too difficult to achieve, or we accept to do something like that only when there is a theater or a movie theater or a big conference room available, and we don't accept to make this kind of events also for, I would say, a casual audience or a small audience, because sometimes we don't have a big audience, then we end up to some extent failing or not doing our best to disseminate knowledge. And I would also mention the fact that it is very important for scientists and researchers to do their best to communicate the results of their research. But it is also very important that people try to understand what they say, even when it is not so accessible, because sometimes science is really hard to understand. And even if scientists do their best, this is not enough. So also the audience and all people are, I would say, entitled to try to deeply understand what scientists try to explain, because this is very, very important, and it is the only way to make the scientific research something bringing innovation, social benefits, and cultural achievements,
Yes,
and
thank
not
you very
just
much.
scientific achievements.
Last question is this. This was the first edition of UniUrb Spritz. Can you assess in terms of people involvement and to consider the prospects in future?
Okay, well, what I'm trying to do here in Urbino, thanks to the success that the first edition had, because the success was measured in many different ways, because first of all, it was not so obvious that so many colleagues proposed different topics, and I'm speaking about not just science as we usually think of it, but we had social sciences, economists, we had we spoke about law, about politics, about engineering, so many different topics, literature. So we really took advantage of all the research areas that are represented here in Urbino. And this was just thanks to my colleagues who decided to spend their time having a drink and a speech in a bar. And the other measure of success is the number of bars and cafes who proposed themselves to host these events. And I would say that for sure the majority, but I would say almost all the bar and cafes in Urbino, at least the ones within the city walls, proposed themselves and accepted to host events. And the third one was public and audience. So all the events, even when we were outdoor and it was raining, there was an audience. So this means that for the future, and we are already in this future I'm speaking about, because after a break for August, the UniUrb Spritz has already restarted. What I'm trying to do is to make it like a tradition, as you said in the introduction, so that it is even not so necessary to announce events on a website, that is what we usually do every week. But it would be even better to go in a bar and find just by chance that there is someone speaking together with students and researchers about a topic which is of common interest, but also of scientific interest. So that's the idea, making it a tradition and possibly exporting it in some other cities.
Giorgio, your main topics was the danger of drugs in drinks.
Thank you.
You talked about a real experience in chemistry department of University of Urbino. Can you please tell us more about that?
Okay, good afternoon to everyone, and thanks Stefania and Alessandro for your nice presentation. And my name, as Stefania told you, is Giorgio Famiglini. I'm a researcher in analytical chemistry at the University of Urbino, Italy. Today I'm here to talk to you about a topic that is strongly linked with the UniUrb Spritz evening that Alessandro spoke about, described above by my colleagues and Stefania and Alessandro. The increasing number of cases concerning crimes facilitated by the use of drugs, like robberies or even more frequently rapes. Why should an analytical chemistry researcher that talk about this topic instead of a criminologist or a doctor or a psychologist? It is very simple, because one day 2 law enforcement officers appeared at the door of our laboratory with a container in their hands containing a residue of a dark liquid, and they asked us if we could analyze it and discover what it contained. Oh, this for analytical chemists, this is one of the most difficult questions to answer, and which can put them in quandary. At the beginning of my university courses, this is exactly what I always say to my students. Even if analytical chemistry must always be able to answer two questions, what is it and how much is there, to be able to do it without knowing anything about the sample to be analyzed is a long and difficult task, and it is not always possible to arrive at the solution. The problem is related to the complexity of real samples that can contain a very high number of chemical compounds, regardless of whether the matrix is solid, liquid, or gaseous. In order to have any chance of success, you need to have more specific knowledge about the sample, such as, for example, knowing what you think you will find and what the applicant's expectations are. In our case, the police officers have thus directed us, telling that the liquid they had came from a crime scene where a person had been robbed after losing consciousness, having only a vague memory of what happened. Therefore, they informed us that this could be a case of DFC, that means drug-facilitated crime, and that the liquid was a drink to which it could have been added a substance capable of making the victim harmless, and that was the substance we were supposed to detect. At this point, I started to consult research literature on this type of crime, because I know nothing about this, and I was very passionate about. Research has taught me that there are many substances that can be used for this purpose, and that these crimes, of which the most common is rape, are far more common than one might imagine. Drug-based rapes, called DFSA, drug-facilitated sexual assault, have increased dramatically across the world. For example, only in the UK reported a 450% increase in the number of cases over 5 years. Many of these crimes, however, are not reported or are reported late for various reasons, such as victims' shame to admit that they were raped, or have voluntarily used drugs, or the real difficulty of realizing what happened. There is also difficulty in admitting that the person who committed the crime is in the circle of family members or closest friends. In the US, many DFSA happen in the colleges, with all the consequences that it entails. Often, as in the case of cleft drugs, drugs are taken voluntarily for getting high during rape parties, without realizing the risks they pose. Risks of being victims of crimes, but also direct risks to health. Okay, the substances that can be used are many, currently more than 50 molecules, and range from real drugs to drugs easily prescribed and available or not easily available. Their action must be to put the victim in a position where they are not able to react, and maybe even to avoid remembering what happened by expressing their action on the central nervous system. They can depress or excite the psychic functions or cause distortion of perception. Generally, these molecules also have a synergistic effect with alcohol, to which they are maliciously added. Alcohol, which in case of excess, is also a psychotropic substance that inhibits reactive capacities. The characteristics of the drugs that can be used to commit these crimes can be summarized as follows. They must be sedative and causing sedation and possible amnesia, must be odorless, colorless, and tasteless, must be soluble in water or alcohol, have a speed of action normally less than 30 minutes, act in low doses, have a short average life in plasma, normally a few hours. Any drug with a sedative effect can be used in practice. In the FC cases, investigators or those acting in their behalf are required to identify and quantify the substances that have been used as a fundamental part of the judicial process. Getting this information
Can you tell us
is
more
not at all
about
simple,
samples?
and
Which
it is
kind of
precisely
samples
at this
can you
moment
analyze?
that analytical
And
chemistry
where are they
becomes a tool
usually
in the
found?
service of the law. Normally, the samples that must be collected are biological and belong to the victim of violence. Urine, plasma, and possible hair or body hair in general. These biological matrices represent a great analytical problem because they are complex matrices rich in other substances that can mask the presence of drugs, especially if they have been used in low concentration. And then there are samples that can be found on the crime scene as the residues of the drinks that bring us back to our real case. Indeed, once the police pointed us in the right direction towards a case of DFC, we had to discover the liquid matrix to which they or any substances had been added, which substances were and in what quantities were used. The job wasn't exactly a piece of cake. Luckily, thanks to one of our colleagues who had a previous experience as a bartender, we managed to immediately recognize the liquid contained in the container that the police officer had. Despite being a very minimal amount, it was, I don't remember exactly, but less than 0.5 milliliters, its color, smell, and consistency left no room for doubt. It was whiskey cream. We didn't exactly jump for joy over it, as this matrix, compared to the most common liquors, was perhaps the most difficult to analyze for its milk content. We all knew that milk, with its proteins and fats, was a tough nut to crack. As a result, even answering the next two questions, which are fundamental in the procedure, was anything but easy. So we started from our studies on the case literature of DFC and FSA, and we also contacted the local public control structure dealing with drugs for advice, and with which we established a close collaboration. This research has shown that the most used substances in the cases of, for example, DFSA are three: gamma-hydroxybutyrate, well known as GHB, a substance used as an adjuvant in alcohol detoxification; ketamine, a strong hospital anesthetic used in cases of severe chronic pain; and flunitrazepam, a benzodiazepine used to treat anxiety, panic, and insomnia. Taking into consideration that the first two molecules are hardly available and that the third, even if it is easier to obtain, is not at all easily available, and that the context where the crime occurred, a small provincial town, we started our research in agreement with the investigators based on the possible use of a benzodiazepine by the attacker. In fact, benzodiazepines are a family of molecules widely used in the treatment of anxiety and insomnia that have different degrees of efficacy and potency among them. Although they can always be bought with a prescription, it is likely that the prescription can easily be used for various needs, and it is therefore possible to get them without turning to the illegal market. So the benzodiazepines could have been used in our case, and we started from this premise. The analytical procedure in these cases, especially in our case where the real sample was very small, includes a series of preliminary tests on artificial samples prepared by us. So we got some whiskey cream and a number of the most used benzodiazepine standards, and we prepared our artificial samples. We then had to try some extraction techniques to verify that they could efficiently separate the benzodiazepine from the matrix, which in technical terms correspond to have good recoveries. The extraction technique purifies the sample from the components of the matrix as much as possible so that they do not interfere during instrumental analysis. Before achieving a satisfactory result, it was necessary to test more than one extraction technique, but in the end, we managed to get through the task by using an extraction system that we had applied in a previous collaboration for the analysis of milk powder samples. The analysis of these extracts was carried out with a GCMS system, gas chromatography coupled with mass spectrometry,
now,
which
Giorgio,
guarantees
we are all
sensitivity and
curious to know the
certainty
results of your
identification
testing.
for this type of molecules. Okay, I know you are curious, but before revealing our results, however, we must clarify that the equipment necessary for these types of analysis are sometimes very complex and expensive, and not all laboratories are therefore equipped to perform these tests. Above all, in the case of biological samples, a certain type of instrumentation and also qualified operators are fundamental for the interpretation and validity of the results. I would like to add a note, the importance of which you will understand when we come to the conclusion of our case. In addition to the instrumentation, proper sample collection and timing, that in the case of biological samples is different from each matrix, is also of fundamental importance. Proper transport and storage of samples is also important because before the analysis, which must be carried out anyway in the shortest possible time. In biological samples, in fact, the drugs can degrade or be metabolized in the body, giving rise to the compounds very different from the precursors. Then will not be revealed. The sampling and analysis of plasma sample cannot be performed more than a few hours from ingestion, normally no more than 24 or 48 hours. For urine, within 5 days, while in the hair, the substances can remain even 4 or 5 weeks, but the hair is a much harder matrix to treat, and its differential growth does not allow it to be traced back to the moment of poisoning. Okay, in the case of drinks, such in our case, we were lucky, these problems do not exist. The molecules remain in solution and their degradation is very limited. The problem in this case, as I said earlier, is the low volumes of sample available. Stefania, therefore, when you have to deal with the cases of suspected DFC or DFSA, the victims are required to provide biological samples as soon as possible to ascertain the positivity. On the contrary, no result will be revealed if too much time goes by. And this demonstrates why there are no reliable data on the real numbers of this type of crime around the world, as I mentioned at the beginning of my speech. The lack of timeliness creates great difficulties for the investigators in reconstructing the events and consequently in taking responsibility. To this should be added the difficulties that may arise from the use of unknown substances by the attackers or the wrong collection and storage of the samples. If everything is not carried out in accordance with strict protocols, the judicial process cannot bring those responsible for the crime to justice. And so how did our case end up? Okay, the analysis of the real sample led to the identification and quantification of a benzodiazepine, bromazepam, of relatively common use, but not one of the most powerful, which was poured into the drink by the attacker in concentration equal to an entire bottle of the product on the market. The quantity ingested in synergy with the alcohol contained in the whiskey cream was able to put the victim in a position where he could not offer resistance, allowing the robbery to take place. So, I start to laugh now, but so apparently everything went very well. our choice to focus on the research for benzodiazepines, the selection of the correct extraction technique, the unequivocal identification of bromazepam at doses compatible with the FC. And so you might think that the case was solved and the guilty perpetrators were brought to justice. If you think like that, you would be wrong. The court questioned that the container in which the police officers brought the sample to our laboratory was not the original glass where it was found, and therefore the sample could have been manipulated and no longer corresponds to the original one. Our work was destroyed in few minutes by a skilled lawyer. Extraction, analysis, results, all was perfect, but could not be used in a court proceedings. This is the law, and the law requires protocols that, if it's not followed, can cancel the best science has done to arrive at the solution.
Although, as you
Right or wrong,
this is
it must be accepted, and we have to behave accordingly.
Isn't it?
Oh yes, it is. I hope I've been clear on a subject that is unfortunately very timely and that affects especially young people who may be prey to criminals in times when they are supposed to have good times and enjoy themselves. All those moments, unfortunately, in which they are more vulnerable. I repeat to make it clear that the cases of DFSA are a scourge that affects young people in schools, during parties with friends, in rave parties where alcohol already plays its part, and the drugs are used in a voluntary or criminal way. So, how can you defend yourself? Okay, there are a number of tips that associations dealing with the victims of these crimes give. Avoid meetings with strangers. Today, this kind of dating is very popular in the age of social media. When you meet someone, try to keep an eye on what you drink and do not drink too much alcohol. If you feel in danger, do not wait and leave immediately. If you think you have ingested something abnormal and you have difficulty in speaking or focusing, feel dizziness, nausea, unmotivated fear,
I
go
can't
immediately
avoid
to the
focusing
hospital.
on the pedagogical approach.
These are all good
Use
examples
school
of behavioral
in order to make
advice.
students
Okay.
aware of the dangers due to involuntary addiction of harmful substances. For example, the substances used to facilitate rape that can also have a sedative, hypnotic, dissociative effect and cause amnesia, as you told. How can we face this topic in a classroom? Indeed, at several stages, based on student age, we can start from the knowledge of drugs. What can they contain? What the effects can be? What are the damages in the human body and the consequences? Then we can analyze people that can be affected by this problem to find out that young people are the very exposed to this risk. How can we prevent a dangerous situation? How a student team can help other people to get out from a dangerous situation? So, can we say that raising awareness on the topic and addressing this topic at school can become a perspective action, in your opinion?
Oh yes, you can say it, but there are also someone who have come up with more concrete and active things to curb this type of crime. I made some examples. 3 girls from Florida College have patented a straw that changes color if the liquid that passes through it contains one of the 3 most used substances in the DFSA cases: GHB, ketamine, or fluritrazepam. A company has designed a nail varnish which, when dipped in a drink, changes color in the presence of the same substances. Roche Company, which holds the patent of flunitrazepam, has added a dye that stains the drinks into a deep blue, and the American FDA has withdrawn this drug from the market. All of these actions are just attempts to stem the phenomenon because, as I said at the beginning, there are dozens of drugs that can be used or others that will be used, and not all of them can be monitored. The conclusion is evident. It is therefore only through knowledge and awareness of the existence of these crimes that we can really save us, suggesting that we implement correct behaviors that allow us to recognize a possible risk situation in advance, which is also the main purpose of this seminar. I would like to thank all of you connected online for your attention. Special thanks go to Professor Stefania Altieri and Alessandro Bogliolo for giving me this opportunity. Goodbye to all of you and thank you again.
To bring science outside the classroom can be replaced somewhere else in any other settings? Why, in your opinion, is it so crucial to demonstrate that STEM are not so far from our daily life and that the scientific subjects are not so difficult to deal with?
Well, I think that science is the only way we know to be honest when we try to investigate the world and to try to set our minds. What I mean is that science doesn't mean truth. Science means making all any possible effort to find out what is a reasonable way to explain the world around us and to deal with it. So I would say that science means trying to understand the world to the best of our knowledge. So, to the best of our knowledge is the key word, is a phrase that I think expresses what science really means. Because science means that there are a lot of people specialized in many different subjects, in many different topics, that try to expand our horizon just by pushing the limit of our knowledge a little further. And then, thanks to dissemination and communication and culture and also instruction and education, scientists in all different topics try to bring to us their knowledge, the new truth that they discovered up to the best of their knowledge. But the best of their knowledge is the best of our knowledge. So what I mean is that if I don't know anything about chemistry, I fully rely on Giorgio and his colleagues in order to deal with it. And this is the foundation of our society, not just culture. So we need to rely on each other's knowledge. And we need to make this knowledge as accessible as possible, but we also need to be aware that there are limits that make it not completely accessible to everybody, or otherwise we will give up with research, we will give up with education, with specialization. So we have to exploit specialization as much as possible. So this means making people aware of what are the most recent scientific achievements, and then making them available to everybody, even to those who cannot really deeply understand them just because they are specialized in some different topic. So that's more or less the idea. It's not so easy because right now in social networks disinformation is the key, And unfortunately, there are a lot of people just selling their opinions as truth. And the reason why fake news propagate in social networks more than scientific data is just because scientists are fully aware that nobody has the truth. So this means that while I would say people who are trying to well, I'm trying to be polite, but I'm I cannot find sufficiently polite words. But I would say that people who try to propagate fake news usually sell their opinion as truth, and this makes them able to be very effective in making very short and assertive statements, while scientists usually don't, because scientists know that what they are saying need to be specified by pointing out which were the conditions that allowed them to discover this piece of truth, which is not the entire picture, the big picture, and this is not the real truth, because nobody has. So, you know, it's quite difficult to really make it as appealing as fake news are, but that's what we have, the best that we have, and the only way we have to survive is to take full advantage of it.
And to share. Thank you. Thanks for your inspiration and best practices. I am honored to be able to have both of you here and to interview you for such an innovative and useful project. Thanks to all the people that are following us and the fantastic scientific staff that is caring about the webinar. Thank you very much, Alessandro and Giorgio. Hope to see you soon in action more and more. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks for attending. It was a pleasure. Thank you, Stefania, for inviting us. Bye-bye. Ciao, Giorgio.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye bye. Bye bye.